Wake up!
What's up guys, Ian here from Sleep Deprivation, back with a very special discussion video. Not only is it my first discussion of 2018, but it's also my very first World of Warcraft discussion. I recently got back into World of Warcraft, and I wanted to do it because I wanted to play Project 70. Unfortunately, the project died in just over 3 weeks, and I mean completely dead, where there was nobody online, nobody talking in guild chat, absolutely nothing. So that sucked. On the plus side though, I got addicted to World of Warcraft again, which means there's gonna be a lot of lovely World of Warcraft videos. They don't call it Warcrack for nothing. Warcrack. Not even once. Except always. Forever. That's terrible advice. Moving on. So, Project 70 was my reason for coming back to WoW, and it is also going to be our very first World of Warcraft discussion. More specifically, why Project 70 failed. Now, before we can go into detail about that, we first need to understand more about the project itself. The more we know about the project and how it operates, the better we'll be able to understand just why it failed. Also, there's probably a good few of you that don't know a whole lot about Project 70, or maybe you've never even heard of it and you have no idea what the fuck I'm talking about, so this will be a good way to get everyone on the same page before we get into the meat of this discussion. So, Project 70 was a fan project started by a group of streamers, the most popular of which was Sodapoppin, and the goal of the project was to re-experience the Burning Crusade content in a way that would make it feel similar to what it felt like during the actual Burning Crusade expansion. This was done by getting a large group of players all to create new characters on the Sisters of Elune server, and we'd all be linked together via guilds, multiple guilds, with the Greenwall add-on, because unfortunately one guild can only have 999 players, and there was around 5,000 at the start of the project. Now, all these groups of players would get together, level from level 1 to 70, cut off their experience, and then progress through the endgame Burning Crusade content from that point on. The project was made to feel more like level 70 through a series of self-imposed rules that everyone in the project had to follow. These rules included things like, while leveling, you weren't allowed to use the group finder or heirlooms, because those didn't exist back in Burning Crusade. You also weren't allowed to run with anyone outside of the project, because if they didn't have to follow the same set of rules, obviously, that would just ruin the experience for everyone. You weren't allowed to have your ground mounts until 40, and you weren't allowed to have your flying mount until 70. When you reach max level, there was rules in place for that as well to make it feel more challenging, as well as stay true to the spirit of the Burning Crusade. These would be rules like you weren't allowed to buy any of the old Badge of Justice gear or PvP gear, because that gear was way too strong and way too easy to obtain. You also weren't allowed to run Magister's Terrace initially, and you also had to go through all the content in order. So you had to do all the heroic dungeons before you could go into Karzhan. Then you had to do every boss in Karzhan before you can move on to the next raid, which would be then Mags and Gruuls. After that, SSC and TK. After that, you went to Hyjal, and this is where things got a little weird, because after Hyjal, you went straight into Sunwell, and then after Sunwell, you went to Black Temple. The reason you did it in that order was because Black Temple was actually the hardest now, because of the changes that were made to it in order to accommodate for the time walking. Group sizes were also different to help accommodate for the difference in power of players. You ran 5 people for Karzhan, 8 people for everything else, except for Black Temple, because Black Temple scales with the amount of people that you had. So it was a pretty cool system, and honestly had a lot of potential, but as I mentioned before, it failed. It completely died in just over 3 weeks. So why did it fail? Well, for starters, remember Sodapoppin and those other streamers that I said started the project? Yeah, most of them were gone within the first week, and not really a whole lot of explanation given as to why. A lot of people seem to think that it had a lot to do with DreamHack happening shortly after the project started. I know Sodapoppin had some kind of surgery that he had to do shortly after the project started, but it doesn't really help the longevity of a big ambitious project like Project 70 when the people who start it and are leading it just suddenly say, fuck it, we're done, or actually didn't really even say much anything, just stop participating within the first week. Because a lot of players joined specifically to play with their favorite streamer, or a lot of other players were just like, hey, why should I give a fuck about this project that the people who created it don't give a fuck about? So a shit ton of players followed when they noticed that the streamers weren't playing anymore as well. Now, not all the streamers quit within the first week, but most of them did. So that really sucked. Then there was something else that led to a shit ton of other players quitting as well. And that was the release of patch 7.3 with the new raid and Taurus and a whole bunch of other delicious content. That's right, a week and a half after Project 70 started, brand new World of Warcraft content was released in patch 7.3. So just horrendous timing to start Project 70, because I don't know if you're aware of this, but the Burning Crusade is old content. In fact, it's 10 years old. You have decade-old content trying to compete with brand new, polished, and balanced World of Warcraft content. You're gonna fail. Burning Crusade just can't compete with brand new content. So yeah, after a week and a half when that patch hit, there was almost nobody left. Like, I'd say somewhere between 95 and 99% of all of those initial 5,000 players were gone. But there was probably less than 100 people, honestly. And I don't mean like 100 active endgame raiders all raiding the same level of content. I mean 100 people, period. Yeah, it was pretty fucking bad. But the declining, and I mean rapidly declining, player base wasn't the only problem. There was also issues with the rules and the difficulty. And by that I mean, even with the rules that were set in place, the content was still too easy. Which, it's hard to balance that, I get it, but, I mean, within the first week and a half, there were some players that had already cleared everything, every boss in every raid, and I don't just mean like, a week and a half of solid raiding, I mean leveling from 1 to 70, and then starting raiding, and then within like a week and a half, you fucking killed everything. It was ridiculous, and when you combine that with the fact that the rules also rapidly and repeatedly kept changing to make things even easier when the content was already pretty easy. Like the rule that said you had to do every single heroic before going onto Karzon only lasted a few days. Then the rule that said you couldn't do Magister's Terrace was lifted. Then the rules that said you had to kill every boss were changed to you just had to have the achievement, which meant you just had to kill the last boss of every raid. Then people just stopped giving a fuck pretty much about every rule. So it was kind of a shit show. And by that point though, honestly, shit was just dead anyway, or almost. But there was one other little detail that kinda made things suck even a little bit more. Now this is minor, and it's not really what ultimately killed it, but it led to it not being as fun as it could have been. And that was the gearing up process. Now, in current endgame, when you gear up, you get a new piece of gear, all your stats increase. You get more strength, more crit, or whatever other secondary stat you have on the item. And you can see the difference in your health, in your strength, in your stats. Then, not quite the case for Burning Crusade anymore, because the stat squish that happened for Warlords of Draenor kind of fucked up all the Burning Crusade gear. To put things in perspective and give you an example, I had a leveling helmet that was 100 item level in blue, and it had better stats than a helmet that dropped in Sunwell with a 150 item level. So I would see better stats on my character from this leveling blue than from a best in slot helmet out of Sunwell. But that didn't mean that the blue was better, even though it had better stats, because there's the lovely invisible stat of item level. And by that I mean every one overall item level you were above item level 115, gave you a bonus to damage done and reduced damage taken. I think it was about 1.6% for every one item level over 115. So yeah, if you had 140 item level, I think it was around 40% increased damage done and 40% reduced damage taken. So even though your overall stats wouldn't change much, or might actually even be worse, you'd be better because of the invisible stat. And an invisible stat is not a fun way to gear up. I mean, I had an awesome sword that had strength on it, and crit, and stamina, and I replaced it with an agility weapon out of Hyjal. As a prot warrior, I used an agility weapon because the item level was better. Like that's what it had come down to for gearing, and that's just not fun. It sucks getting an upgrade and seeing that you have less health and strength than you had before, despite the fact that it is still an upgrade because of the invisible stat of item level. So yeah, when you combine the shitty gearing with the lack of difficulty, the inconsistent and changing rules, and the fact that people left in droves because a lot of the streamers quit early, and the release of Antorus with patch 7.3, that's why Project 70 failed. Or did it? You see, what if Sodapoppin and the other streamers lied to us? What if Project 70 didn't fail? What if it actually succeeded because it was meant to fail? If that sounds exciting to you and you want to know the answer to that question, you're gonna have to wait, because that's gonna be coming up in my next World of Warcraft discussion video that'll be releasing on our channel here within the next week or two. So you're definitely gonna want to hit that subscribe button and hit the bell to make sure you don't miss it, because this conspiracy theory about Sodapoppin and the other streamers lying and Project 70 meant to fail, that's gonna be an exciting one. So thank you for watching. Definitely stay tuned. That's going to be coming out in the next week or two here, and I'll see you guys in the next video.